Hello, Clifford Kaufman here. Welcome to Clif Chats. I'm excited to share this conversation that I had with Denny Fongheiser on March 4th of 2022. We talked about lots of different things. One takeaway for me was his realization that he would never be a better copy of someone else, but being his own genuine, unique self was more valuable. Denny has a treasure trove of experience, having played with and recorded with such artists as Seal, John Paul Jones of Led Zeppelin, Pavarotti and Friends, Ann Wilson of Heart, Teddy Pendergrass, Shawn Colvin, Brian Setzer, Tracy Chapman, Roger Waters of Pink Floyd, and so many others. I hope you enjoy this conversation. It was a pleasure to talk with Denny.
Briefly the other day about, flexibility, and diversity. And I think that's really important. And I think, one of the hopeful positives that will come out of what's been going on the last couple of years is we're all a little bit more open to diversity, and we've had opportunities to try some other things. And like you have, and you find some things you enjoy, and they're still connected into what you do. And I think diversity is a good thing. I feel like it feeds. I don't know if you feel this, but if I'm producing something or doing arranging stuff or writing or something else, and or even doing editing stuff. I do like editing voice things I did one for a film recently and stuff, and I really enjoyed it. And when I go back then to play, it feels like I've been fed something else. And I have something else to say when I'm playing. My playing changes. It's just a little different. It has something a little something. I think that's really good. Yeah, I remember I had a producer, Don Gaiman, who my first was really the person who started using me on records, and he back then he said to me, when you have breaks, he was very kind and said, I think you're gonna do well, and he said, and you're gonna be busy, but when you have breaks, make sure you live life and you do something. You just take those breaks a little bit, and then go back and play. And don't give it all up before you go in and play, and I'm like, yeah, but I
broadcast this conversation I had with Denny Fongheiser
not play for a long time,
March 4th
but and be able to do well. But he had a really good point, live life, and that's how we
had a great time talking with him about
which is basically kind of the whole jazz concept, basically. Back in
and a story that you told that I was listening to that podcast. I forget the guy's name in England, but about, I think it was Jim Keltner telling you, you said you were feeling stale or something, or you weren't feeling fresh, and he was saying, go take the next tour that comes about, and mix up your perspective. It's kind of the impression I got from what I thought he was saying to you.
Yeah, and he was right. He was really right. I of course listened to him, and it just so happened some came up like literally the next day.
It was hard, right?
It was hard, yeah. So. And I said, well, Jim said I got to do this, but of course it was an honor anyway, and I would have wanted to do it, but yes, and it worked. It definitely did, and no, I believe in that. I believe in that wholeheartedly. Even like you must know when you play percussion and drums, even if you're off doing more percussion. When you come back to a kit, you have a fresh approach. Or when you're just doing kit and not percussion, when you go to the percussion, you have a fresh approach, or a combination of, so that's good. Well, even you with your kid, being home with your son or your daughter, and you're, experiencing that part of life, that goes into your playing as well.
Yeah. When he was born, after the first 4 months, I was a stay-at-home dad, and I thought, my career I have no more career. This is it. and I was bummed about that, but it wasn't true. And I had to kind of push along. Yeah. Well, there was something. So also I definitely, because you've been in it for so long, I think getting into how you.
You call me old?
What's that?
You calling me old?
No, no,
I call myself old.
Uh, I mean, you are a veteran musician playing at a really high level, and how you've learned to because I always look at it. I had a conversation with Matt Krause, who's a podcaster. He's a Nashville drummer and has a podcast named called Working Drummer, and he. We're talking about the lulls, and I look at it like ebb and flow, like the tides coming in and going. That they naturally, and when they go really far out, they usually come in, comes in really strong. And so I'm just wondering over time how you have, learned to maybe accept those ebbs and flows of work. And, it sounds like the advice that you received was all about that. But, I think the natural inclination for many of us is to be like, oh, I'm not working enough, instead of enjoying it, or maybe being proactive in some sort of way to get more work.
Well, yeah, all of that. Number one, I think it's a constant work. I know for myself anyway, and I think for some others I talk to about this, is we know that. We know that factors, we should enjoy it, and we should, it will come back. But we're, as human beings, we have to work on that. There's still are times where you go, life's over, career's over. I used to kind of joke around about where you'd be so busy you feel like your limbs are being torn apart, right? You're just like a period of time, and then there will be boom, zero, right? And it's like, why can't it just spread out a little bit, Yeah. But you do, at those points, you feel like, is that it? Is this going to happen? And my thing with that is putting out, my fiance is also an artist and photographer. She was out on tour with us with Hart, as a photographer. And we talk about this a lot about, just keep putting the energy out there, manifesting. When I break, I love what I do. I love being creative. I love, whether it's playing, whether it's programming, whether it's producing, whether it's learning new software, whether it's whatever, listening to new things. I love it. So I will, give myself things to do and put that energy out there and do it. And inevitably, whatever you start doing, something ends up coming. And if you just put it out there and stay positive. For me, I think another thing was that thing of diversity, where I was fortunate, I have been fortunate and still fortunate with this, is I'll literally have somebody, for me, just playing drums, right? I'll have a producer call and say, hey, I think you're really the right person for this record I'm doing. It's a really singer-songwriter, like sensitive brush thing, or just some percussion, and you're front row and say, okay, thank you. Okay, we're gonna do that. And literally an hour later, someone else will call, hey, I got this heavy rock thing. You're the guy I want to use. You're the rock guy, right, for this or whatever. And they have their perspectives on what you do, and it can be very different. And I used to always go, okay, thank you. As long as you're thinking of me, I don't care what you're thinking of me as, because I love doing all of those things. And I think that helps, being diverse. For myself as well, when I went and did the Heart thing, right before that, I was doing, one of the reasons why I went and did that, I was doing a lot of records, and which is my first love. That's my main thing that I love to do, and be creative with new songs and great songs from new songwriters or even veteran songwriters, but to be creative that way with them. And but I was doing a lot, and I had received a bunch of CDs at the time, back in CDs, and I just felt like I was playing the same stuff. And that's when I saw Jim. I was actually on the way to a session when I saw Jim at the studio. And we were both doing something with T-Bone Burnett in different studios. And he made that suggestion. And once I did that, more things kind of, started opening up, because I hadn't toured in 5 years because of my kids being born, and I didn't want to.
So you made the decision to stay in town and just do studio work because you wanted to be around.
Yeah, to be around, be around. And so this was like 5 years later. And so when I did the hard thing, right after that, I produced a record of an artist that I had developed, and we got a deal. And then I got this, went back to do some more heart, and I got a phone call to go to Japan. And I went there, this band called Bees, B''Z. I don't know of them here, but over there, they sell out. We're selling out 2 nights at each dome, 70,000 a night. Like in a day. They're huge over there. Really great musicians. And I was the only non-Japanese. And so I went and did it, and it was 3 months. But then I went back again the next year, and then the next year. And I finally kind of stopped because I didn't want to lose what I had here. But and then when I came back, I started working, but I'm not sure that it didn't all happen just in a right way. Like if I would have stayed, because I was doing so many records at once for a while, that it may have started, let's hear somebody else. So I kind of feel like me going and doing those tours helped. When I came back, it was like, oh yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
Let's, I remember, and so it just kind of happened. So I think I was fortunate with that. And so again, land of diversity, and then when I stopped touring in 2000. I did the last tour. We did a world tour with Tracy Chapman, and I was musical director on some of that tour. And when I came back, again, my kids were getting to be about teenagers, and I wanted to be around. And so I put a studio in my home, and I started doing records out of there. And it was kind of before we started all this, so it was kind of a little bit more difficult back then. But we did it, and producing, and and I think that helped because budgets were changing, and getting smaller, and the label thing was changing, and so. It was way in the beginning days that drummers had studios. Keyboard players had them for a while, and so that really helped. And that kept things going. And then the recording industry really changed. And those big records, we weren't going to Capitol Records anymore. They were very rare. It used to be those places all the time. That's where you went to record. Yeah. And there, A&M, East West, and all those bigger studios here, and also we used to fly to London, to Atlanta, to North Carolina, to New York, different places, Seattle, to record, and that started diminishing, and now with virtual recording, we hardly ever fly to go do that. But luckily with virtual recording, it kind of brought back those opportunities again, right? Because budgets really got low, so they couldn't afford to fly people. So I actually had a production company with Kimberly, actually, for a couple of years. So we were developing artists and producing. I was still playing on records, but I was also doing this at the same time. And then he decided to tour again when Ann Wilson called, and which brought about 5 years ago. And so I went and did that. It was only supposed to be a couple of weeks, and it ended up being a couple of years. And then it turned into Heart again. And Kimberly was joined on our tours as well. So it was a great thing for us. And I wasn't taking any tours, but when Ann called, I love Ann, and I love great singers, and again, it was only supposed to be 2 weeks, and I was like, yes, I'm, it's there. And she really wanted to stretch and do some interesting things, and it was really, really great. And we, like you were saying about the pandemic earlier, we had 4 years booked right before the pandemic, and it kind of went down away. So I just started writing. I was writing. I for quite a while I've been wanting to write for some TV film, and so but have kind of in your own style kind of thing. The main scoring guys are great, and that's a whole nother thing that I'm not going to claim that I could be proficient at. But I was starting to develop this, and then recording just started happening, and the virtual recording happening. And I told you about audio movers that made things easy to be able to do it on a higher level of sounds and back and forth. So it's kind of interesting. In the last 2 years, it's been actually about the last year and a half. Recordings now, from what I'm seeing, is much closer to what it used to be in heyday. Which is just people are investing in recording. And we're going also to bigger studios again. You don't spend as much time. You're not there for a week or two tracking a record. You're there for
get the good sound of the studio for something specific, that sort of thing.
Yes, yeah. You get the tracking, then they go home and do the rest. But it's so great, and it's been a nice combination. And so, to go back to your question, with that terrain, that distance of time, which is a few decades I just mentioned, yeah, there's going to be shifts. But I think if we're aware and we're open to understand what these shifts are, and like, if I wouldn't have been open to what Jim said, I wouldn't have been open to the heart thing as much, right? Or I might have thought, oh, I'm too busy. I'm sorry, I can't do that right now. I'm doing this, right? And that might have been a mistake, because maybe the busyness would have stopped, So I think we just need to stay open and willing, and recognize things that come in, and for me too, it's not about the big gig, or the big, rather than just doing great work. It doesn't it doesn't matter, even the money thing side of it. It's not about that even. It's because that comes while you're doing your work. It's really about doing good work, loving what you do, building relationships. Everybody I've worked with, you don't see each other all the time. You may need to see each other again sometimes. But if there is ever a connection again, it's friendship. You have this connection when you work together, especially
relationships are real. I mean, you're basing them on genuine relationships, not because I want something from this person, or I want to play with this person.
Right. Exactly. Or they're going to pay me, or any of that. No, it's not about, it is a real relationship, especially when you're creating together, and we have to be pretty open with each other. Even if you're just walking and doing a session together, everyone's vulnerable during that. If you're doing it right, you're very vulnerable during that recording, and you're connecting. And there's something pretty magical about that, So that's the thing too, is a lot of, like, for me, a lot of people I've worked with, there may be a 10-year span, and then all of a sudden I'll work with them again. They're all repeats, throughout time. And I think that's really important. Again, building those relationships,
Yeah. Well, you talked about openness, and that's something that has struck me from what I do know about you is it seems like you do have a lot of openness. And you talked about being able to do different things, being diverse. But it seems like also in some ways you created a niche for yourself. And so what do you think about, and this is kind of something I'm asking for myself too, for my own information, but hopefully it helps others as well. When I moved to Nashville, part of my goal was to differentiate myself as someone who can do a hybrid sort of thing, a mix of hand percussion and drum set, that sort of thing, shakers and, different sounds. So what are your thoughts about kind of, I know I'm not a metal drummer. I know that's not something that I do, and I don't really want to do that. Like, so what are your thoughts about approaching it, the art or the business, you could separate them and put them together like
Great
that.
point. I'll give you a quick from my experience and then my opinions of it past then. When I first moved to LA, 1980, and I came here with a band, and we did really well right away. But I really wanted to make records. I didn't really want to be in a band. The band finally dissipated about a year later,
Mm-hmm.
and I was told at the time the music business was going through. It was kind of right when MTV was starting, and MTV really kind of brought it back at the beginning of MTV. But the business was kind of hurting at the moment, and people said, "Well, God, you want to do records? You know, there's really only 5 guys on each instrument, and it's not a lot to
Like
go
guys
around."
are
But
being called for the records. They're like,
what's that?
you're saying like there were like 5 go-to guys. That were
5
being,
main guys, right?
yeah,
You know, at the time,
yeah.
and you know, if you are going to do it, you kind of need to use these drums and get this kind of sound. And I was like, well, I don't feel like, of course, there's no room for someone new if I'm going to be like everyone else, right?
Yeah.
Why not use those guys? They're already doing it, and they have more experience than I do doing what they do, right? And that isn't really what. And I liked my drums, and I had a certain thing that I did, so I took that approach. And I felt, and I still feel this pretty strongly. I feel like we are ourselves better than we can be anyone else, right? And so, yes, we want to be diverse, but we don't necessarily need to copy somebody else. And copying someone else, we're only going to be a weak version of them. And we're going to be a weak version of ourselves as well, because we're not fully being ourselves. So even when I get called for certain things, I grew up in San Francisco, and I played a lot of funk, R&B, and jazz, and I really didn't grow up with playing a lot of rock, even though my career's been rock, and mostly on the funk and soul stuff. And but I was able to understand what different kinds of music are and where they came from and what the energy and what the feeling they're trying to put across. What does it mean? And especially if you go back to the originating sources of any genre, right? That's to me the real part of the genre, right? And if you get into that feeling, you can play them all. You know, you can get there. There's been times though I've been called to do things and I go, am I the right guy? You sure you shouldn't call so and so? You know, and because I don't do this all the time, you know, I can do my version of it, but man, so and so's great at this, you know, and I don't feel, I have no hesitation to, you know, recommend that to somebody, and you know, they inevitably, you know, say no, you know, we want what you do, how you do that, and that's fine. And so again, I appreciate that, but it is how I do it, right? There is my thing. If they want to do something, and you know, I think about other people. There's been so many times where I think about Ringo when I want to do something, right? I kind of picture him. Was that?
What would Ringo do?
Yeah, you know, and you picture how he plays. You feel that, and you have that in you, and you can put it out there. But it doesn't sound like Ringo. Ringo sounds like Ringo. You know, I there's some influence there that I can do. Same thing with Jeff Porcaro. There's been times, anytime I did a shuffle, which is, you know, I literally, and especially since Jeff's been gone for a long time, but I literally would go, help, you know, help me, and you know, you just kind of get into that zone and you know, and get there, but it comes off like you. And I think it's really important for people to have individualism. Percussion, you asked me about percussion.
Yeah. How did that start? I mean, how did you, and how that evolved over time too?
And that again is goes to what you said about, you know, kind of us as individuals. Percussion, I played percussion before I came to LA as a kid a little bit, but I really learned percussion playing on records, and on the rock and pop stuff, that basically starting off with shakers and some congas and tambourines and stuff, and there was a certain feel that, you know, we had to get, and it kind of made sense to play with. I played the drum track. I'm playing those. The feel would connect, and I really learned from producers, and so I learned that way, more on the recording side, into percussion, and then it grew. I really enjoyed it, and it grew, and then back when I did Heart. But before that, I would start combining things. I put percussion within the drum kit, and I was always changing my drum kit, something that helps me stay fresh to where, you know, maybe to other people it may not sound. It may not sound different in any way, but to me it feels different when I set up in a different way and approach something differently. So even in the middle of records, maybe even each song sometimes. But incorporating the percussion, when I did the Heart thing, they said we want to reinvent all of our songs, and we want to do acoustic versions. We're going to do two sets, an acoustic set and then a rock set. And so we're going to do a lot of acoustic versions. And so I'm sitting there going, all right, we're having bass. Fernando Sanders was coming to play bass, and so I needed kick drum on the percussion stuff, and you know, at the same time, and I had just gotten came from Remo. This was early 90s, right? 93 or something. And Steve Edelson was there, who he had developed the djembe, their stuff there. It was just a prototype. It wasn't out yet. Literally flying to Seattle at the airport, I called them up. I said, please, can you send that prototype? And I had a couple other things that they had. Can you send those up? And they send them up, and so at rehearsal I put together the kick drum, the djembe. I felt like the djembe can give me everything, you know, from the center with the kick, and I doubled that with a kick. So basically, you know, the center of the drum was with the kick, and then the snare with the slap, and it sounds in between. Had a hi-hat. I stacked a bunch of tambourines on it. And then had a couple of rivet cymbals and some other things. And that was my kit. And that ended up becoming a thing for me. We did a live recording DVD called The Road Home. And then we did a live record with John Paul Jones producing it. And with that kind of setup. And I morphed that setup into a snare drum and a couple toms as well when we did the record. And so that just became a thing then all through the 90s for me, and has been ever since.
People started to know you for that, it sounds like.
Yeah, you know, even John, you know, came here, flew to LA to put me on djembe on one of his songs after that, you know, and which was new for me, you know, to really be considered that. And you know, I still that over the pandemic, actually, I developed a kit. A lot of different sounds, basically all that we played with hands, feet and hands, no sticks, and kind of to manipulate, to mimic a lot of like analog percussion, you know, with the hands a little softer, kind of like analog percussion, drum machine stuff. And so now I was working a lot of stuff in Ableton Live, and I was just listening to things, and so I came up, I said, well, you know, how can I play like this instead of program like this? And now that's become a thing. I've used it on quite a few records recently, and or at least that's part of the song where, you know, and you know, just a lot of different tones, and really mimicking 808, 909, but as a human. And
drum sounds.
Yeah.
What, have you delved into looping yourself with Ableton?
Yeah.
Like live looping?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and then over, yes.
That's
yeah.
really cool.
It's great. Ableton's great. You know, it's funny. Ableton, in the late 90s, when I just got into Pro Tools and starting to put a studio together, there was a PC program called Acid, and I think Sony put it out or something, and it was the only program that you would actually change the pitch and the tempo of whatever loop, right? Whatever tempo you wanted, and so I started using that a little bit, and because I've always been as interested in the electronic side as the acoustic side, and so I started using that, and then I heard Ableton was coming out for Mac, and I got it the day it came out back then, and then I didn't use it for quite a while, just only just because everybody was using Pro Tools, and but then in about the last 5 years, I've been using it again a lot, and I really, it's a great creative program.
It's powerful.
Really.
It's powerful, and I found, because I've delved into a little bit, that it can change the way you approach writing.
Exactly.
Because of the looping, between starting and stopping loops and that sort of thing.
I know, it's brilliant.
Yeah,
it's brilliant, and the flexibility in it is really wonderful. Yeah, I love it a lot. And then with the Ableton Link thing, it's great too, because you can just remotely link it to your Pro Tool session, or it's really great. I actually use MPC as well. I have an MPC Live, and that has the Ableton Link, so they'll all link wirelessly to each other. Pretty tight. It's actually pretty good.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I love all that stuff. Then one of the reasons I said about doing the hand thing, I always like creating new sounds, and I love the electronic stuff as well. When in the early days, I had the Simmons drums and all that kind of stuff in the early '80s, and pretty much all the drum machines that came out, and which kind of helped me get in, because when that happened, when in the early '80s, the drum machines were kind of taken over, and it diminished a lot of work for drummers, right? And I gotta say, in the height of my career in that time, if it was a decade earlier, in comparison, it probably would have been even twice as much because of drum machines, right? I liked it, but a lot of drummers didn't want to do it, so they kind of fell away, and so I really learned them all, and I used a lot of I had many of them, and I would use them for we didn't have Pro Tools, so we need click track. When we did do click track, not everything was to click track, but when we did, I used different ones for different songs, because they all had a different timing. Even the quarter note, the click was just felt a little different, and some of them actually moved a little bit. They weren't perfect, and sometimes that was it. So back then we used to use a lot of machines for different clicks, but back then when the Simmons thing was happening, I remember Bill Bruford saying he got far into that, and he said, listen, he goes, drum machines are taking over, and we have so many sounds that we can have with them, and they're very consistent, and in their attack and their timing, but there are things we can do that they can't do. So let's learn what they do, but take it a step further, and add our humanness in there and creativity in there, and that always stuck with me, and it still sticks with me. I just thought it was just a brilliant thing to say.
Yeah. So how did you start to incorporate acoustic and electronic, and what were some of the maybe pitfalls or challenges of that, and what seemed to work well?
Well, back as far as recording, I had, when I came to LA, and when I first started, of course, I had zero money, negative money, and I would go to Guitar Center in the corner of my street, and the Simmons 7s came out, I think, and I had the Snares when I was like 17, 18. I was playing clubs up in Northern California.
Hey, what's it called again?
The Snare, the little black Syndromes came out, and then Snares with the Syndromes. They were like the first. They had the real high pitched sound, the doo, or the clap sound.
Okay.
And so I had a couple of those, and when I came to LA, then the Simmons thing took over, So I found a way to get them and just, purchase them and I used them. I started using them on overdubs for demos and stuff that I started doing sessions. And so it's helpful to have. I actually saw Michael Joachim, who was with a band called Kitty Hawk. And it was a fusion band here in LA. And he was doing a lot of sessions. And I liked his playing. And I still love his playing. And he was using Simmons tones, I think, in a kick and snare, and
acoustic kick and snare.
Yeah, acoustic kick and snare, and it was great. And he was, it was really unique and sounded great. So that inspired me. So eventually, I had the Simmons 5s and the Simmons 7s, and then racks started coming. There was an instrument called the 4-at F16. And two brothers, the 4-at brothers, made this machine, and it was the first 16-bit 44-1, or actually you go with the 96 sampler, and one sound per module. I had 8 modules. At the time, this was mid '80s. It was like $8,000 or $10,000, a lot of money. And today, I mean, you can get this for $6 now, in the software. But a few people, doing records got them for records, because it also printed off tape immediately. So you can also just re-trigger any sound you wanted off tape, and it tracked really, really well. So anyway, I had my cartridge company at the time built this rack for me. I had the Simmons 5s, 7s, the 4-at. I had a line mixer, had a patch bay. And then I had triggers on all my drums, and I had pads. And so I was able to put whatever trigger into whatever sound or combination of sound. And it comes out this line mixer at the time. I also had a thing called the MX1. And I was just talking about this the other day. When gating became a thing, especially with the gated reverb thing in the mid '80s, right? So, I can play pretty hard, and back then we kind of had to, because room mics were big and gated room mics were big, and so we had to hit them pretty hard for it to react well, for the sound to be right. So with that, if you're hitting a snare that hard, it's inevitably opening up the gate on the toms, right? So they're not as useful. So I found a way. The MX1 was made to trigger Simmons drums off acoustics, right? Because it would just take that transducer of the voltage coming from the transducer on the tom right into this MX1, and it just made it a solid signal to go into Simmons, right? And it was very quick. And so I said, maybe this can open gates. And so we started using that to open the gates. And so I was able to dial that in really easily. I can hit the snare drum as hard as I want, nothing else would open. And so we used that for a while. There was a thing called, what was it called? It wasn't the Russian Dragon. It was, there was a thing that came out. It was right before the Tracy Chapman record, actually. Right as I'm going to do Tracy Chapman's first record. And the idea was, David, the producer, said, maybe we can have some percussion going, but, in a human way, as we're tracking. And so we had this, we tried it. It didn't really work well enough. It was a good idea. It basically followed your hi-hat or your snare drum. And, but it didn't quite work. And that record, we didn't want to go to a click track. That's why we're trying that.
The Tracy Chapman record.
Yeah, they wanted it to breathe, and so we ended up not doing that. We didn't use any electronics on that record at all. But
to say it seems like it's a very acoustic album.
Yes. Well, that I'm going to go back to your other question about being an individual.
Sure.
On that record, I wanted to do records. I had a tour booked, and I got a phone call to audition for that record, which is, you don't really audition for records very often, you know. And but I was still beginning in getting in records, and I was willing to do anything, and so I got someone else to replace me on this tour, which seemed crazy, but I just felt, because it's only an opportunity, but it's something I really wanted to do, and so I got out of the tour, and gracefully, it was fine, and then they sent me the cassette, you know, of her songs, and we went in with bass players, and I was in the lounge in the lounge in the studio, and I can kind of hear her voice, and it was so consistent, and I can hear the drums coming through, and the guys, there's some really great guys, and I was like, oh, most of these guys have more experience than I do, and and they were playing great, but they were playing the music a little bit more like what was on the radio at the time, you know, in certain kind of groove and certain thing. And in hearing and listening to her, I'm like, I didn't hear it that way. I just didn't think that was working with her, you know. So I just took a chance. I was like, well, you're either gonna like it or not. And you know, I went in and did my thing, which was probably a couple sticks in one hand, and you know, and a brush in the left, and something, and some reggae feel with some, you know, whatever, something more subdued and unique with her voice and her guitar playing, because to me her guitar playing and her voice all interacted.
Yeah.
And I felt like the drums just needed to support that and be a part of that, right? And her voice was just so amazing, and the songs were so great, and her songs were written so well and simply that you could get away with being a little bit more creative with it, you know. So anyway, that's what I did, and it worked out. You know, I went home and it was great. Actually, I went home, and there was a message on. I had an answering machine back then. Message on the answering machine asking me to go back the next day, and I played with a bunch of bass players, and I had never played with him, but I knew of his playing, and I liked it a lot. And it was Larry Klein, and so David said, "Oh, that's a good idea." And he called him up. He came down and played, and we started the record the next day.
So that was the combination, that part of the rhythm section.
Yeah.
So you made a recording. You made a recording to the tape to send them, or I was a little not unclear.
No. They sent me the tape, the cassette of her just playing guitar and singing of the songs to listen to.
So it was the next day when you played with all these bass players that you actually got the gig, or
right? Yeah.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
And so, how throughout your career, and has it stayed the same, or has it changed? How have you approached, you know, these relationships and friendships, and also, you know, you mentioned you had a tour booked, and you gracefully were able to find a replacement, and you know, so I'm just curious how, and that sort of gets into the business of it some, but how did you approach your approach to relationships, and then also when there is a conflict, where
honesty, just be open and honest, and never want to take anything, never, you know, do things for the right reasons.
What do you mean take anything?
You know, I mean, don't do things don't do things just because it's work or money, or manipulate anything to get anything, you know, get it honestly. There are people who try to manipulate things to get their way in, you know. I always saw that. I saw people, and I saw them rise pretty quickly, and I was like, oh crap, I have to be like that. And but I kind of never heard from them after a bit. They kind of disappeared, you know. I thought, okay, well, there's something, right? And for me as a musician, as far as relationships with the people, with the artists, you know, respect for their music. Me as a musician, it's all about them. It's about their music. You know, even doing records, this may not seem like a good business plan, because producers are going to be doing more records than the artists. But if there was any conflict between the producer and the artist, I would try to find a happy medium. But I would lean toward the artist if I felt they were correct, you know. because it's their music, it's their name.
Yeah.
And in reality, it may be their only opportunity to do this, right? And especially at that time when it was all big record labels, right? And you had your chance or not. And now it's a little bit different. People have more opportunities, I think, in different ways. But to me, it's like, and they may do the record, it may not even be promoted well, or promoted at all, or shelved. The A&R guy might get fired, or whatever. So they may only have something that to hold and listen to that's their work, and so give them something, give them something that they're going to be proud of listening to, right? And I wouldn't go against people, but I would really I would always lean towards the artist, and so respecting their song. And it's not about what I play. In my opinion, any musician, it's not about the drums, the guitar, the bass. It's about the collective, and your part of that song just happens to come through drums or through bass or whatever you're doing, somebody's doing. But it's not about that. I don't think drums when I play. I think the song you just play. And we make that joke. Like someone goes, "Oh, I like that thing you did." He said, "Oh yeah, that was page 32 in the stick control book or something." It's like, no, that those are great. You practice those. You work hard on them, but when you go to play, that's gone, right? It's not about you. It's about the collective. And things like getting out of that tour. It was actually a band called Cock Robin. I had done their record, and it was very successful in Europe, and they had been big prior to that as well. And I was going to do the tour. And man, I really wanted this opportunity. I would have done the tour if they, put up a stink, or really, really felt bad about it. But what I did is I contacted Tristan Bowden, and he's a great drummer. He at the time he played with Kenny Loggins, and he was in Chicago for a long time, and he did a lot of records too. And he was available and willing to do it. I thought he would fit well with what we did on the record. And so I approached them. I just said, "Hey, this opportunity's come up, and I'd love to do the tour or do it another time. I have Tris is available and can do it. Would that work out? Would that be okay?" And it worked out. And so I actually worked with them after as well.
And created a situation that was, I guess what people call a win-win, where they, were obviously happy with the person who filled in, and
yeah, exactly. And that too, it's like, if you are going to do something like that, definitely give them something new, someone they're going to be happy with, and you want them to succeed as well. Or it's a small business, it's big in some ways, but it's a small business, and we're all fortunate to be in it, and we need to support each other.
Yeah.
Even drummers, like, it's not a competition. There's
Absolutely.
In fact, because everyone's an individual, and Jim Keltner said this a long, long time ago, and I agree with him. I've over time I've learned it myself. And drummers have a certain thing. I think, I don't know if it's more than other instruments, but maybe there's a cool camaraderie and respect, and not as much of that competition. I think we support each other a lot, and there's a really, really cool connection there, and I think, we should all be that way. Even when I didn't do the heart thing anymore, it was a little bit, I had moved on, but then they ended up taking a long hiatus as well. So it was cool that I did go do those other tours. So I was glad I did that. But, we always had a good connection. That's why Ann, called again or whatever. And they had called one other time to do something. but I think it's important. Or with Tracy, I did her 2 records. I didn't tour. I didn't want to tour at the time, so I didn't tour. And then that was in the mid '80s or something. And then in the like in the mid '90s, right at all that time, I started touring a lot. I came back from Japan. I think I got a phone call, and she was going to do the first Lilith Fair concert back then. So Sarah McLachlan tour she put together, and she was co-headlining or something. It was like 12 shows, and said, "You want to know if you wanted to come tour?" And I thought, I'd never toured a record that I actually played on, and so okay, like learning your own stuff. So I went and did that, and then that continued for a few years, and off and on, and then and we did the 2000 tour, and then at that point I was ready to come home and do what I needed to do at that point, and we all have still really good connections, and I'm not touring with Ann right now. I really felt like when it started up, I felt like it was a little too early to go tour, in this pandemic. I felt now it's turning around and good. I kind of felt, number one, being on a tour bus is about 100 times worse than an airplane, as far as breathing everybody's air. And, everyone gets sick on tour buses in normal days, let alone COVID. And I didn't feel comfortable encouraging big gatherings, being a part of that at that point. And although I completely respect anybody who felt differently and does their thing. So and so she's got her thing that she's doing now, and we still talk. We talked the other day, and we'll do something again together again. But right now I again, because the records have been doing, there's a lot more going on here now and producing, and I'm doing a lot of different kinds of things. Just kind of want to stay here and do that right now, but maybe later.
I'd like to hear more about what you're up to, but also I'm wondering if you ever had a point where you started to think, okay, I need to approach this, or at least this aspect of music as a business, or myself as an entity, yourself. I'm just curious because I feel like maybe that's changed some over the years, where like early on for myself, I didn't think about I need to approach this as like a business. I didn't think about it as a business at all. And as I've gotten older, I've thought almost like compartmentalizing, because I don't want to approach being creative as a business, but I'm just wondering if there was a certain point where you thought of either like, I need to present myself this way, or I need to market, or if there's anything that you have in your career that ended up having
it's very different today than it was before. In the 80s, 90s, it was different. Like I would play, if you were playing records, if you wanted to be on records, if you were doing any kind of TV or jingles or film, you didn't talk about it, because the record producers wouldn't hire you as much as they would if they just thought of you as a record person back then, right? And it was like everything was very separate. And I did a little bit of all that stuff. I didn't do a lot of it because I really preferred records, and I didn't want it to hinder. You just didn't talk about it. On the business side back then, also, there were certain financial things where you were on records. If you played on hit records, where you're, you get double scale or triple scale, wherever your pay would change. And so it was a little bit, you kind of had you didn't share when you did lesser things too much, because then the mentality back then was, oh, they must be hurting. They're not the one we want to call now, right? It was a different kind of thing.
A perception
of it. It was definitely, And, or even like when websites started, people were, some were very careful on what they listed that they did. And because things are just a little bit more judgmental. And now that's gone away. I remember in the 90s, and I had arranged and produced and written some like music and commercials, and I didn't really talk about it much, but I was getting hired to do some of that, and I loved it because I was able to hire anybody I wanted. I mean, great musicians I put together, from Springsteen's band, from anybody. You know, it's like it was great. I didn't really talk about it much, and then I got a phone call from T-Bone Burnett, and he goes, "Hey, I'm doing this commercial. I want to do it." And he goes, you want to do something?" Like, "Oh, yeah, sure." And I was like, okay, now I can say it. You know, T-Bone's doing it. You know, it's like, it's like, but let's fast forward to today. All that's off. You know, people are being diverse, and it's respected, and it's fun. It's all music. It's all creativity. You know, back then artists didn't even have their songs in music and in commercials or TV or film, and that started changing over the 90s and 2000s. So it's a different world now, which I think is so much better. As far as marketing myself on it, I think, I toy with that. There's a lot of people who are so great at doing that, on the internet and taking photos of themselves on all the sessions that they're doing and stuff. I don't really do that too much. I feel like most of the things that I get aren't from social media, really, and if we're more in the industry kind of thing, people who already kind of know you or through you. But I still, I think it's important, and I may do more of that as time goes on, and I understand why other people do that. I don't do it as much. I'm a little uncomfortable using, me personally, and just maybe from my past experience, using other people's sessions as a place to promote myself. And my focus, I don't want the focus to be on what photo I'm going to take, or how I'm going to. I want my focus to be on the session. And that artist. And not to say that you can't do both. I just don't think I'm good at that yet. I got to find.
I can relate to that in that, if I have a certain gig, I'm like, okay, I should take a photo, but I feel that same way. I want to be really, I want to be focused on what I'm there to do. And so, but it's become a thing where I'm like, okay, it's important to do that. But also just back to what you're saying about the perception, I've worried about being perceived just as an educator. That people might say, "Oh, he's a teacher. He's not a player." And so that's interesting, because I've actually felt that less here in Nashville. Well, no, I don't know if that's true, but anyway, I'm wondering if that. I mean, there's always going to be perceptions, no matter what. But
well, I think that has changed as well. I mean, Joe Porcaro taught, his whole life, and here he was one of the busiest session guys, and he was always respected for teaching. I think that, but nowadays, again, because people are more diverse, I think it's okay. I see a lot of people now, a lot of newer people that do a lot of records and sessions that are also, doing, advertising, their videos, education videos, and doing that as well. So I think it's accepted. I think it's a great thing, because you're helping others, you're giving others your experience. And I think that's a great thing. I don't see that being as much of I wouldn't be personally as worried about that these days. Again, that's one of those things, maybe, a little bit further back, where people go, "Oh, we must not be busy. They're teaching, or they're playing on this instead, or they're playing at a club instead." And, but I don't think that's the case today as much.
Yeah, well, I have noticed some more higher profile people, musicians, advertising that they teach, which is, so that's changed a little bit, maybe. So, well, I really appreciate you talking to me. I have one other thing I wanted to ask you about relationships. And it involves John Paul Jones and T-Bone Burnett. I'm just curious, if you would just talk a little bit more about the meaning of those relationships, and maybe some lessons you learned from them.
Let's see. With T-Bone, I met T-Bone. We a good friend of mine, a bass player, Eric Presley, at the time recommended me to play in a band with Sam Phillips, T-Bone's wife, to open for Elvis Costello. And again, it was just really interesting kit I had to put together, and I was kind of studying what T-Bone was about and Sam's records. And we went and did these rehearsals and shows, and we just hit it off. We just really got along really well. And I was already doing quite a bit of records, and but T-Bone didn't know, and but we liked each other, and so and then when he found out I was doing the records, and that kind of helped because I didn't mention anything. I don't really do that. I don't like drop names a lot unless people ask, and so he kind of liked that back. So he's got along in a lot of different ways. So I started working with him. I think really the build of that is just showing up and them knowing that they can rely on you, and them knowing that you gave a crap, and you're going to give it your all. And even like when we did the Mr. Jones thing, the Counting Crows thing, I was basically hired to do percussion on top of the rest of the songs, and then the song came up. It was going to be the single they were thinking, and Steve Bowman, the drummer at the time, was a great drummer. Wasn't a song he really connected with, even personally. He didn't really like it that much, I think, from his words, I think. And it was a different style than he plays, and he has a great style of his own. And so we went in and did that, and I think with that relationship, and I've done that for quite a few people, helping back then before Pro Tools, and they could fix a lot of things. I used to do a lot of ghosting or helping drummers and bands. I'll always try to get them on the record and work with, and I think the producers like T-Bone would like that because, again, you weren't just taking, you were trying to help out the situation, make the best out of the situation. A thing that came up between, it's funny you mentioned John Paul Jones and T-Bone. Later on, when I went to do the road home in Seattle with John, and we spent like a month, and at the end of it was a live record, and at the end of the 5 nights we did like 3 weeks rehearsals, and at the end of the 5 nights he calls me up the next day, and we got along great, talking and talked a lot about music, and he said, he goes, "Oh, could you come to my room, please?" And I said, I went there, and oh crap, am I gonna have to replace a bunch of stuff that I suck, And
the principal called you in.
Yeah, exactly, because he did it kind of proper, He has this smooth. And I walk in, I go, "So what?" I said, "How much does it suck? How much do I have to replace or something?" He goes, "Oh no, none of that." And I said, "Oh, great." He goes, "No, you're fine, nothing." And he goes, I want to ask you. He goes, "There's a record that he had played me that he had just done this Diamant de Glace. It was basically drums, wild vocals, and bass, and some B3, and it was really cool." And he goes, "You know that record you really like?" He goes, "We're doing a tour. I'd like you to do it. It's just you and me and her. It's bass drums and her, and we're going to tour Europe and the States." And I said, "Oh man, that'd be amazing." He goes, "Okay, so if you can be in England in 2 weeks, or London in 2 weeks," and I'm like, I had a record. Actually, it was the Wallflowers record to do for T-Bone, and I thought, shit, I gotta do this, and I gotta try. And so I called T-Bone, and I told him what was going on, and he goes, "Shit, you gotta do that," And I said, "Well," I said, "I don't want to, mess you up." I said, and so it was great. They were able to get a drummer that was going to do it prior to me to do it, Matt Chamberlain, and he ended up doing it, he was great. And I went and did the John Paul Jones thing, and so again, relationship, just be honest, open,
Yeah.
You
Well, I was
know,
gonna say, if you didn't have that relationship,
communication.
yeah, that could have worked out differently. But that sounds
Yeah,
like,
or I could have been too afraid to even ask, or
yeah,
and it's fun as long as you're doing it for the right reasons. I wasn't doing it because, hey, these guys can pay me more. I'm gonna leave you. I'm
yeah,
going. Here's an opportunity. I'm struggling here. What do you think?
yeah.
I'm more than happy to stick with what we said. But what do you think? And luckily, T-Bone was like, no, you got to do this.
Yeah.
And
Well, that's being a supportive friend too, which,
but
he was being a supportive friend in that
yeah,
he was
exactly.
saying this is opportunity that you have to do.
I don't know if you find this. I find that a lot. Kimberly and I were talking about this the other day. In this business, I really, and I do, there's something about it. A lot of times it gets a bad rap, and that bothers me because I don't share that feeling. I don't share. I I feel for the most part, especially on the artistic people in our business are very open and sensitive, willing, giving, and there is a connection. That everyone has this nice connection. Again, if you don't see each other all the time, or even if you've never met but you know of each other, there's like an automatic connection to that.
Mhm.
And so I see that I feel a lot in our business that willingness of people. It's a community if you know each other or not.
I agree, and that's been part of this Cliff Chats. I feel that in Cliff Chats, talking with you and talking with others, and and also I think it has to do with who the way that, like you said, you acting with integrity, who you've surrounded yourself with, because people have said, oh, Nashville's really competitive, and I always say, well, it doesn't feel like that to me. It feels like there's some great collaboration opportunities,
Yeah.
and that's just the way I've approached it, and just looking for real friendships, and real musical connections that go hand in hand. Um, well, would
Wonderful.
you just talk a little bit more about what you're doing now? And yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk
Hmm.
with me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just
No problem.
about the producing, about the artist development, and just in what maybe if there's anything else that you're working on.
Hmm. Yeah. You know, Again with the pandemic, stuff was happening. I've been doing a lot of virtual recording from home. Some producers that I work with, uh, some that live in LA, but some that live in elsewhere. Actually, one in Oregon, one in New York, and it would it's enabled what's really cool. It's enabled me to play with artists again from all over, like did
Mhm.
a Canadian record, uh, uh, Denmark, Belgium, and a lot of different things like that, and through these producers. And I also got a phone call to produce this record. It was a concept record, and it was kind of a classic rock style, kind of progressive. Record, but it was a concept record. So and it was 21 songs. It's like and some of the songs are long. It's a lot of music. But we went into East West and recorded all the basics there, and spent a lot of time since last June producing that record up and
Mhm.
on in between these other sessions, and uh, it ended up being it's being turned into a rock opera now, and so I'm kind of helping put that together as
Uh-huh.
well. Kind of be a musical director and on it if it comes through,
Mhm.
and one of the producers to help facilitate it, and so that's been fun as well. On top of that, and especially wanting to stay home for the time being, and in between, still doing some other productions, finding other artists and great songs. I just love great songs, and if I can
Mhm.
help develop those, that's a lot of fun. But other than the virtual uh, recording as well, the nice thing is I see everybody getting out into the studios again, and that's been really a great thing. It's something I miss and mourn a lot. You know, I don't hold on to it. A lot of people want to like hold on to that, and I feel the world changes. We need to change with it, and because we're a part of it, we're naturally going to change with it, and I like being a part of it. I like growing and doing something different. So I don't mind the changes that have happened, but there are some things going into a great studio, classic studio that was built for that purpose.
Yeah,
and it's just there's something really special about that to me. And you you feel like you're doing something driving there, or even walking down the hallway and getting to the studio, and there's trucks of cartage, with so much equipment around, and you just really feel like you're doing something. And that's been nice again, and everyone's happy to do that. Everyone's pretty excited, and there's also a lot of new people doing it as well, and that's cool. A lot of new energy to meet, and you see a lot of the old people as well, older people that you've known for years, and that camaraderie because most of those places have multiple studios, so you're seeing people, you're kind of hearing what each other's doing a little bit, or you're running across people. There's always something really good about that. You talk about go back to your question on marketing yourself. That was kind of marketing, right? People will see you at sessions.
You're there working.
You're there working. They see your cases in the hallway, your name on the kid. And that would remind them of you, and so now that's probably Facebook, right? People, what you do get off of like social media as far as work is people going, oh yeah, I remember, I forgot about him, or her, or whatever, and so that's the new version of your cases being in the studio, right? And but so that's been really encouraging to me, because it tells me that even that people are really willing to invest in recorded music again, even though it's not a selling platform. There's not a money making off of selling records these days, and that's why really the only sessions going to those studios over quite a few years, most of the sessions anyway, were just film, because money was still in film and TV, sessions. But now a lot of record sessions again. So people are, investing, which maybe part of the pandemic did that. People, said, hey, I want to, and a lot of people investing in themselves.
Absolutely.
And because it's not as many labels or companies doing that, we don't spend as much time, but with technology, we don't need to, we don't need to have, I used to bring 25 to 30 snares to every session, You don't need that anymore. There's other ways of doing that, and there's no time to go through them, and we've got to kind of get in and out. And so instead of doing, one song a day, tracking, or 2 songs a day, like the old days, and, you're doing 3 or 4, and so it's, it's different time wise, but it's really nice. And I like the combination. I like it all. I think it's, I think new technology is great. I think there's great things about it. I think there's some things we're missing without everyone being in the same room playing together. But that's a certain kind of record, right? That's a certain energy and vibe and that you need for a certain kind of record. And for other kinds of records, that's not the right thing to do. And piecing it together, going into Ableton and piecing things together is the right thing to do, and I just enjoy it all. And, I'll probably go and, if I'm asked that, do a tour again, and touring again in the future. But right now I'm really enjoying this. And I'm glad the world's opening up. I think in this next year, it's been, we've all everybody on all kinds of different levels have of discomfort this has caused. We all have this discomfort. The worst of the people who have gotten sick or died, or have, we all have friends that have, or relatives. But I think the positive that can come out of all of this is, I think there's a new energy. I think we're all a little different. We're all a little bit more open, a little bit more willing. And people are looking for change, kind of taking a little bit more control over their life. You know, a lot of times to think.
More gratitude for connection.
A lot of gratitude. And realizing what you don't have to have. I hope people realize too, how you can live, you can,
or how you don't have to live too.
Yes, how you don't have to live. That's a better way to put it. Most definitely. Definitely.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. I really enjoyed.
Yeah, me too. Thank you for reaching out. I appreciate it.
Happy to do it. And thank you everybody for tuning in. Bye.